Robyne Hanley-Dafoe.
Hello, Peter Katz. How are you this day?
I should say Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe to give you proper reverence. And welcome to another episode of Here in Time. Oh, no, wait. It's just called In Time. All right, let's start again. Okay. That's our website. Okay, we can start again, and we'll just edit this part out.
It's my favorite.
Hello, Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe.
Hello, Peter Katz. How are you this fine day?
I'm doing well, Robyne, and as I said before we hit record on this thing, I think there's this sense of holding many things at the same time, and I've heard the expression holding two things at the same time. I feel a bit more like I'm holding 7 things at the same time, but I know that this space that I'm holding with you right now is one of my absolute favorite spaces to hold, and so even though I can be aware that there are other things, there's nowhere I'd rather be than right here, connecting with you and hopefully connecting with the people that are listening out there and providing a nice moment for them as well.
Oh, Peter, that is so welcoming and open and kind and very, very generous. So thank you for those kind words. And I'm so pleased to be with you to have these conversations, because I feel like this is this wee little gift we can give each other and the community to like pause, right? Like just pause the busyness, the hustle, all of the worry, all those competing demands. And for the next 30 minutes, we can just be here now. And I'm grateful that we are able to make time for this.
This is I think I said this in a previous episode, but like this is the dessert when you're full. You're like, yep, I got room for that cookie right there. I used to. I don't know why this is coming to me right now, but I remember like when I was really full but I still wanted dessert, I would just think about how ice cream melts. And so even though the mass of it seems large, it's like I could probably just take a sip of that, and so it's not going to take up that much room in my stomach. So I should probably have some.
I love that example. I think that's amazing. Oh, so good. And you know what? I really invite people to think about, especially with all that busyness, is the fact that like when we do like, again, like really kind of forge or fight for some time to do the things that like help us feel better, feel grounded, feel supported, feel part of community, like we feel better immediately. And it's not like usually like a lot of the things that we do around self-care, it's like, you know, you do something and maybe in 21 days, you might just start to feel a benefit or an effect. But when you make time for the things that are really like matter, that align with your values, that like fill back your bucket, like as soon as you go into that, you start to feel the benefits of it. And as I said, as soon as your face popped up on my laptop, I just got this wave of all of a sudden I felt better, because I knew we were going to go into this conversation and the rest of the world would just pause for us to like to be present. And this is just, I hope that's what our listeners are able to experience as well.
I love that. And it makes me think, you and I were together at an event last week, and I had the pleasure of hearing you. And one of the ideas that you shared that I feel is connected to what you were just sharing is this idea of rather than thinking like, oh, I had a good day or a bad day, and sort of taking the full 24 hours or at least the 18 hours or 16 of awakeness, talking about like, oh, I had a good morning or I had a good afternoon. And I have been thinking about that ever since, and I've really found it kind of comforting, empowering. Like I had a day the other day where I woke up and I went to the gym and I did like all the things, but then for whatever reason at 2:00, I just fell off, and I was feeling sad and overwhelmed, but it allowed me to then be like, oh, well, I've still got the late afternoon and the evening, like I've got these other parts to my day. And so even if I just think about this morning, like there's a lot happening that's I'm finding like a bit overwhelming, and there's some grief, and there's these different parts. And so when I woke up, I sort of felt a heaviness, but then, like you said, as soon as I saw your face on the screen here, I felt like, oh, this is a great day, but this is a great part. And I just love that you kind of gave me that idea, and hopefully giving that idea to others. Like, where did that come from? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So we talk about that in our work as days as quarters. And usually what happens in like Western culture, we like kind of put a day all together, right? So it's like, did you have a good day or a bad day? And the idea here is that you actually view your day in quarters or in fours. And it can be like any kind of any batch of time, Peter, that like makes sense for your life. So for me, in my particular world, it's like I have the morning, and that's my first quarter, which is before I start doing some of like the actual work or my professional work. It's like my morning is this like one particular quarter. And then I have kind of like that kind of 9 a.m. till about 2, which is kind of my work block. And then I have late afternoon, and then I have evening. And the idea is trying to work towards, again, that goal of ensuring that like you want at least 2 out of the 4 quarters, or like 50% of those quarters, to be, going all right, to be okay. And what happens sometimes when we just write things off like a bad day, we're like losing some of that awareness of the fact that there's parts of the day that actually were good, or were productive, or felt safe, or felt like they were like, hey, not so bad. So I love using that days quarters. Where it actually came from is I obviously have done a lot of work with athletes, and I support, athletes in my own household. I have 3 athletes, as you know, with the kiddos. And one of the things that we often talk about is like, you can't let what happened in the first quarter affect you in quarter 2, 3, and 4. So it's like, next, right? So like if we talk about, good shots versus great shots in basketball. So let's say you took a bunch of good shots, didn't land for you. Instead of thinking all about those shots, I want you to think about your next move, right? Where's the next great shot? And so that's where it actually derived from, like I was trying to encourage athletes not to get stuck in the feelings or the experiences that were happening earlier in their game or in the quarters in basketball. So that was that kind of idea, like, hey, why don't we think about that in life? Because one of the things it does is it builds our agency, Peter, where we can choose again, right? So if you did have an off afternoon, that's okay. You still have your later afternoon and your evening. And what's really cool, Peter, is we actually have more control around our morning's quarter and our last quarter. So if we get those morning routines and that morning headspace dialed in, and the evening rituals and routines, we're batting 500 simply by having a morning and evening place in our days that are somewhat protected, or at least like built in a way that are going to help us feel good.
I love that, Robyne. I really do find it empowering. And for whatever reason, as you're talking about it, I also had this image of fractals,
Yes.
and how like a tree looks like our lungs, and if you keep zooming, like everything sort of is like this kind of repeated pattern, and I like this idea of like sort of this like fractal of your day, like these these different parts of your day. And as you were speaking of it, I also kind of grew it to our entire lifetime. And I remember listening to a woman, I think she was doing a TED talk. I've listened to a lot of talks, so it's hard for me to situate it all specifically. But she was talking about, she had had a really challenging life, and had been an addict, and like, even was on the street, and then, but there was a moment where she decided, and she like stood up, and obviously many things happened between that, but now she was a speaker and doing all these things in her life, and she basically said that the thing that really struck me was like, at any moment, we can, again, she worded it more beautifully, but like at any moment we can become something new, or we can make a change, we can shift. Yeah. And so I love this idea of doing that hour by hour within our day. And I love that idea within our lives, and that and it's not this sort of, kind of hyperbole, rose-colored glasses kind of a thing, because certainly there's there's inertia and all kinds of factors and different parts of our lives that are hard to shake or those kind of things. But I certainly feel inspired, and I wonder if people listening feel inspired by this idea that like at any moment we can choose and we can find ourselves on a new path.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, Peter. And I love this idea that like when we bring awareness to what's happening, we actually are in a really powerful place to actually like start the shift. And I love shifts. And I actually talk a lot about the fact that like at different seasons in my life, I'm at the point now where it's like, I trust myself so deeply that I can figure things out, right? Like I know I'm going to figure it out, but sometimes my head and my heart aren't on the same page. Sometimes that's a huge delta between my head and my heart. And what I've learned is to like lean into this with some patience and trust, because I know there's going to be this moment when all of a sudden my mind shifts or my heart has that shift, and then it's ready for what's next. And sometimes it's almost like listening to that little whisper of your heart that says, okay, Robyne, now take that step. And like just really trusting our intuition that like we know when it's time. And often when people, I'm not sure if you get this question a lot asked in interviews, Peter, this is one I get often asked is the like, what would you tell your younger self? And it's a wee bit different than a question you asked me earlier in episodes, because it's kind of like this, assuming that at 43, I have this wisdom that I would now share with like younger Robyne. And the answer that feels the truest for me to share is to learn to be done sooner, because I really mistaken this sense of loyalty in staying in situations longer than I should have. And I never listened to that part of my head and my heart that was like, no, little one, it's time to move on, because I called it loyalty, or I called it like persistence, or, you know, I'm at that stick to itiveness at all costs. And so when we think about change and seasons and just how we're showing up in our lives, I honestly really in my heart believe so many of us are so pulled back by old stories, and we have opportunities to pick a different path, but the familiar, even though it might not be our best path, it just might feel safer. But when you actually put that safety and trusting yourself that I'm going to be able to figure it out, like I feel like that becomes it becomes a mighty force where you can go into uncertainty feeling braver with more courage because you can count on yourself.
I'm listening to you, Robyne, and I'm also so overwhelmed with resonating with what you're talking about. Because I know, like I like to be a good listener, and when someone is sharing something, not be like, oh, me too. Like I like to just sort of hold space for it and make sure I hear every sentence that's being said before I think of my own. And as I was listening to you share that, I felt a deep resonance, and I suspect that many humans resonate with that idea that it's hard to listen to those whispers, or we're sometimes confused by what the whispers are saying, and there's even confusing messaging, right? Of like if we think about relationships, there's that once relationship messaging of like relationships are hard and relationships are work and you know, stick to it. And then on the flip side, there's like don't settle, but then there's also this messaging of like soulmate, or like there's all these conflicting things that sort of make it hard, I think, to listen to that true voice or kind of hear the whispers in the noise. One little tool that my mindfulness coach gave me that was a revelation to me, because I often feel like I battle with competing voices. And I even remember, and I don't mind sharing this, like when I was going through my divorce, I remember really battling with this idea of like, what is the courageous thing to do? Is the courageous thing to leave? Because again, I won't go into the circumstances, but it was clear that that might be necessary, and then, or was the courageous thing to stay and to like fight for it. What ended up being the answer was both. Was I needed to stay and fight for it until I realized that it wasn't going to work, and then the courageous thing shifted. But the tool that my mindfulness coach gave me, I said, how do I know which voice to listen to when I have all these different voices? And I said they're competing with each other. And she said, well, Peter, your true self. I think I was describing to her like a voice that was kind of a bit negative and sort of pushing me. And she said, your true self would never speak to you in that way. Like your true self would never criticize you. It would never speak with aggression. It would just never speak to you in that way. And so the voice, I'm going to cry.
Oh.
Like your true self speaks from love and compassion, and your true voice is the blue sky above the clouds, and your true self is the one that speaks to you with love and patience and care and compassion. And so I know for me, when I'm struggling to know which voice to listen to, I get quiet and wait for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. My friend, you share so bravely. People feel that. I feel that. I thank you so much for that share. And we talk about it. For me, I think about it as the kindest voice, right? For me, it's kindness and all the things you described in terms of love and compassion, even a wee bit of grace and mercy. That is like it's just like that origin of kindness. And I try to listen to the kindest voice. And I would love to, if it's okay, I'm not adding to your story and your experience, but what I would love to share is just this gentle little insight that all of the parts, all of the voices, all of those directives or those feelings that we hear in our own mind, all of that is you. All of that is us. And that maybe I encourage people, and I do this work myself with my own therapist that I work with, is that we have all different parts, and that like critical or that like kind of judgy, that like, hey, there's a right way to do it, manage other people's perceptions, like all that. We kind of talk about that in internal family systems theory as the manager. And like the manager voice is the one that's like keeping us on track, and it's preventing us from getting ourselves into trouble. And the manager serves a purpose in our brain. Like that's part of us, that it serves a purpose. And ultimately, all of the voices, even the mean ones and the harsh ones and the critical ones, the big kind of goal that all of those parts of us have in common is ultimately we're just trying to keep ourselves safe. So by it giving you like rules and structure and like push harder, work harder, do this, what that's trying to do is put you in a place that's going to increase the chances that you're going to be safe, even if you need to do maladaptive behaviors to get there. And I just always, for me, I'm the journey that I'm on and where I'm always trying to like deepen this understanding, Peter, is that even the messy parts of us, the mean parts, the shadow parts, the manager parts, whatever they are, like we are that mosaic of all of it. And we are all doing the best we can with the tools and the resources that we have in the moment. And I have developed this like, almost like this, like really good rapport with that part of my brain. That's like the manager and the disciplinarian and the one that's like work harder, because she has gotten me places that I never would have imagined was possible. So again, yes, listen to that tender, kind, compassionate. That is like, I would say like that is like the heart of what we are. And when we hold space for the other parts and recognize like, hey, these are parts of us too, I feel like we can then work to what we call in the therapy, the goal around integration. And we can show up with all of our messy parts, our broken parts, our magical, beautiful parts, all of it. And we can be okay. And that's enough.
I love that, Robyne. I really appreciate you adding that nuance, because again, I'm not taking the scientific perspective on this, but I know that your research backs this up. I have a song that I play called "Come Down," one of my songs, and I often give people the prompt before I play that song that, like, this is a song about letting go. And I talk about the parts of ourselves that we want to let go. And as you just described, rather than being frustrated about those parts of ourselves or sort of saying, oh, I wish I wasn't like that. If we want to release them, how do we release them with love and gratitude? How do we say, thank you for keeping me safe? Thank you for being what I needed. And so I appreciate you adding that. And one of the exercises that my mindfulness teacher does is sometimes as we're doing these kind of visualizations or these body scans or these focusing techniques, there's some really dark parts that emerge. And the exercise is not to be like, okay, move away from that. It's actually to move closer. And often it often sort of morphs into some kind of human form of some kind. Yeah. And often what we do is I visualize sitting down next to them and I don't even ask that other part what it needs. I just sort of am present to it and sort of sense into it, and then it speaks and it's like sometimes it's really angry and it's swearing and it's like, don't you know that I'm the reason you're here? And it's like, don't you try to get me away with this mindfulness? Yeah. Like it really resists the processing. It really resists. Or sometimes it's this little kid and that's just scared or, and there's all these different parts that happen. Even I even have the experience sometimes of, as I'm sitting next to this being, it goes from being this big angry adult, and I actually watch it shrink to this like little kid. And anyway, all that to say, I really appreciate what you're saying, and it also reminds me of I'm doing a course right now with the wonderful therapist Terry Real, and he says he uses this image basically of like, you know, our adaptive child. And he's like, yes, you know, you put them on your lap and you have a great conversation with them. And then you say like, now get your sticky hands off the wheel. Go to bed. And so I love that.
I love it too. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem. So, 2 orders of business, Robyne, because I'm mindful that we've got 7.5 minutes left here, and we often run out of time before we get to ask ourselves our questions. So well, first thing, I just wanted to continue the tradition of just finding out where are you in the world, Robyne? What happened before, or what's happening right after this?
Yeah, so I am in London, Ontario, Canada. And I'm doing my last presentation of 2022 to Western University this afternoon. And so I am very excited. I actually finished up my education at Western, so it always feels like a wee bit of a homecoming. And then so I'm going to do my presentation. And Peter, as we talked about, I am then going to safely find my way back home to Peterborough. There is a wild storm happening, and I am going to find my way safely to get back to my people because I'm feeling a wee bit homesick.
For all of our listeners in the Bahamas, you have slightly different experience. So
I love it. And you, where are you, Peter?
I am. This is a bit of a momentous occasion, Robyne. I don't know if you know this, or I'm realizing it now. So I'm at my home in Toronto, but this very well be my very last broadcast from this location. So I'm moving, and so I'll be enjoying the delights of moving right after this. But I think this is a wonderful final broadcast, and I feel anyway. There's a longer story about me sort of struggling with this place itself, never ever kind of fully landed, and also feeling grateful that I was able to create this studio in this space, and this studio was kind of changed my life over the course of the over the pandemic. So I'm going to focus in on the gratitude feelings of this space. All right. Well, we got some questions to ask each other. Okay. Robyne, are you of the heart and mind to ask or answer? What would you like to do?
I will start. I'm good. I'm completely neutral. So you pick if you want to ask or you want to.
I would like to ask. I would like to ask you the question because I don't know why. I just got excited about asking this question. Maybe you'll have a 1-second answer or maybe you've got more. But I would love to know, what is one of your most favorite memories that you associate with looking up at the stars?
Oh my goodness. So what a beautiful question.
And you can take a moment, like really feel free to take a moment with it.
Yeah, the image came back like crystal clear. So as you know, I had some troubles in my adolescence, and I recall that once I was able to, I got clean and I was able to start rebuilding and building a life in the future. I was able to finish my high school and I started in college, a community college. And in my last year, I was able to do an international placement. And that was a really big deal to be able to work in somewhere other than Canada for me. And I was in Barbados and I lived with a family. And what was really cool, and this is a whole other story, the psychologist that I was working with when I was in Barbados, I met her in prison, but I wasn't actually in prison. We both worked in prison. And then we realized when people said like, oh, how do you know Debbie? And we're like, oh, we met in prison, that we actually had to change that narrative because people misinterpreted it quite understandably. So Debbie, who I met in prison as people working in prison with persons who were incarcerated, she was from Barbados and she was Bajan. So I went to live with her and her family while I was doing my placement. And I recall being like just in this crossroads, Peter, where I was just like, I don't know. Am I the addict? Am I the broken teenager? Am I now apparently going to be the scholar? Like, who's the real Robyne in all of this mix? And just feeling enormous amounts of pressure that I was supposed to figure it out. And also being like 18, 19 and like not even being remotely close to figuring it out. And I remember one evening when I was living on the island, we were invited to go to like a beach party, like a barbecue at the ocean. And I remember this moment, like there was that bonfire, there was music, there was merriment, there was joy. And I remember I actually like kind of walked away from the group and I was just kind of like sitting by myself and just kind of like taking it all in because I still hadn't really figured out how to like interact with people quite yet, just because when you are somebody who has experienced addictions and then you're around people who are having a great time, like I always kind of felt like I was like I made other people awkward and uncomfortable and I didn't like that. Okay. So sorry, this is meant to be a shorter answer, but then, so anyway, Peter, I found myself wandering down the beach by myself. And I remember looking up at the sky and it was, again, just the most spectacular, like vistas that you could imagine. And I remember looking for Orion, the constellation Orion. I always use that as kind of like my barometer. And what was wild is I had this moment where, Peter, it was in the night sky, but it was just in a different spot. And I remember having this moment where Orion, which I had looked at so many times in these dark hours and these dark seasons in my life as a teenager, I always knew where it was in the night sky. And here I was in a different part of the world, and Orion was in a different part of the night sky. And I just had this moment of just this idea of things move, things shift, but there are things that are constant. And I just still to this day, anytime that I am able to see Orion, that constellation, I just go back to that moment of just like embracing just just really the mystery of all things creation. And why that also is so amazing for me, Peter, is that in that moment, I realized I didn't know what the future was, but I trusted that I had one. And when you don't know if you have a future, when you've experienced depression or, just like there's kind of this idea of feeling so lost and then having that kind of sense that there is a future. And so that night sky was quite symbolic for me. And it is also as you know, my oldest child's name is Hunter, which is Orion.
That's, I just want to repeat the words that you said that made me cry, which is, it was still in the sky. It was just in a different spot. And, that hit me. And I think that's maybe a comforting thing for us all to know, that where I take it is like our true self and is always there. And in some moments when let's say we were to make our life the night sky, there's going to be these like different moments in these different places. And, sometimes there'll be clouds or storms or, whatever the metaphor is, but it's like, we're always there. We're just sometimes in a different spot. I love that. Thank you.
You're very welcome, my friend. You're very welcome.
All right. Well, I have a client call in 6 minutes. So if you got a question, or we can either leave it there, or I can do a quick round answer to a question if you've got one.
I'm going to ask my question. Because I think it is. What's one thing that you could do for yourself, Peter, today one thing that you can do for yourself today that it's going to like just give you that little bit of tenderness, that little bit of self-love. And that one thing is that when you do it, that you're present to the fact that here I am and this community is, and like, we're all there with you cheering you on. What's one thing that you can do at some point in the next quarter of your day, or third quarter, fourth quarter? What's one thing, just one simple, realistic thing that you can do? And then when you're doing it, you're going to be like, I am doing this because I care about myself, and these emotions and these feelings and these experiences are real, and I'm valid, I'm enough. And this one thing that I'm going to do for me to say, I'm going to be okay.
Thank you for that question, Robyne. And because I'm answering it, I'm going to do it. So
I know you.
The gentle accountability as well. I may have mentioned this in the past, but I'll say it again. One of my micro joys. Oh, it's actually like a mega joy, but it's a micro action that's required. Is to walk down the street to this little coffee shop and just get a really nice, perfect micro foam latte. But the distinction for me, that based on the question you just asked, is just enjoying every sip and just having like the joy of every sip. And I always like to find a spot where the sun is kind of beaming in, and it's not a good spot if you're going to sit there and work on your laptop or whatever. It's the spot sometimes that actually nobody wants to sit because there's too much sun. And so I go sit there and like take in the sun and just appreciate it. So even though I have a very long to-do list, and I'm sure so many listeners have long to-do lists, that 10 minutes, that 15 minutes, I'm going to use that as fuel for everything else. And it'll just be a nice moment in my life that I had. So thank you.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I hope everyone else listening can just take 1 micro minute to add something to one of the quarters in your day that lets you know that this is this moment that I'm holding space to say, I'm doing a good job, I am enough, and that's A-okay.
Yeah. Oh. Well, Robyne, what a beautiful time connecting with you. I feel, as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, I really feel transformed by this conversation. I just feel lighter. I feel these waves of goosebumps. I've cried at least twice. And there's a beautiful relief in that. My heart is full, and I really feel transformed. And I hope that we were able to I hope that's able to spill over into the ears and hearts and minds of some of the people out there as well.
Beautiful. Until next time, my friends.
Until next time.